Finally, some GOP-ers in Washington, D.C. are waking up to the problem of armed bureaucracies, and they're trying to do something about it. But will they pass their legislation and prevent Joe Biden from vetoing it? Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. You know, whether it was the 1.6 billion rounds of ammunition the Department of Homeland Security began buying with our tax cash in 2012, some of which, by the way, were hollow point rounds internationally forbidden from use in war, or it was the IRS recently buying 5 million rounds of ammunition, or the Social Security Administration requesting nearly 200,000 rounds in 2012 alone, or the United States Postal Service, or the Environmental Protection Agency dipping into the bullet and arms cash craze. In fact, it's easy to hear echoes of George Washington and other founders who, for good reason, warned against standing armies. And now, finally, some GOP-ers in D.C. are waking up to the problem of armed bureaucracies, or they're making it look like they're waking up to it. Nick Pope reports for the Daily Caller, quote, several Republican lawmakers have introduced legislation which would disarm enforcement agents from the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, the Department of Labor, DOL, and the Internal Revenue Service, IRS. Republican Representative Clay Higgins of Louisiana introduced the No Funds for Armed Regulators Act of 2030 on June 30th, joined by 7 co-sponsors. The bill will disallow the use of taxpayer dollars to hire or retain armed regulatory enforcement agents in the EPA, DOL, and IRS if it becomes law. Well, the key term there is armed regulatory enforcement. That's a term that stands as a linguistic mask for the more precise descriptors threats, commands, diktats, and edicts. Not only is the U.S. Constitution not designed to allow these fungus-like offices at all, it was precisely this kind of so-called regulatory enforcement imposed over a much smaller proportion of their lives than ours that in 1776 drove the American rebels to fight the war for independence against Britain. Quote, deep state bureaucrats continue to push their executive authority into every corner of America, treading heavily upon your rights and devouring your wealth, Higgins said in a June 30th press release. This bill is a key step in pushing back against the oppressive tactics being used to enforce regulatory policies. And these GOP members of the House are not alone. Quote, Republican Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa introduced her own bill on June 30th, which would expressly bar the IRS from buying weapons or equipping its agents with firearms, and it was titled the Why Does the IRS Need Guns Act? The IRS has approximately 2,100 armed agents in its enforcement division as of April 2023, according to a report from Open the Books. The agency bought $10 million of weaponry and related equipment between the onset of COVID-19 and April 2023, including purchases amounting to $5 million in 2021 alone, according to Open the Books. And then there's the Environmental Protection The Environmental Protection Agency. Quote, the EPA currently has 150 enforcement agents who are allowed to carry firearms for their duties, according to an EPA spokesperson cited by E&E News. There were a further 48 agents in the EPA's Inspector General's office allowed to carry as of November 2017, according to a 2018 report from the Government Accountability Office. These proposals likely won't pass both houses and the reconciliation process that typically brings slightly different versions of the Senate and House bills together, and few people could doubt that gun grabber Joe Biden would veto the proposal because, despite his and many of his supporters' bluster about stopping so-called gun violence by making it harder for peacefully minded civilians to obtain guns, Joe and his ilk ceaselessly support gun-backed threats and violence against those very civilians that they want to disarm. In their call for armed bureaucrats, they will claim that these aggressive agents of the state need guns for self-defense. Not only is that inverted and insulting, it belies their own claims that we civilians don't have a right to keep and bear arms for self-defense. And of course, let's be certain, bureaucrats from the outset aren't engaging in self-defense at all. They're not doing anything like that. They get their income via involuntary taxation. They enforce threats and diktats. There's absolutely zero predicate on which any bureaucrat can claim to be engaged in peaceful actions or intent, like we citizens who just want to be left alone. And that is important constitutionally, morally, and practically. This GOP move is encouraging, but the promoters of the two bills could actually do better. They could abide by their own oaths to protect and defend the U.S. Constitution. They could propose the elimination of most of these unconstitutional, immoral, and unnecessary agencies. Now, it's up to us to recognize the standing armies are all around us. And we need to see that whether the stuffy bureaucrats are the ones carrying the guns or they're backed by police so-called enforcers who carry them, all political institutions are actually police states, backed by some form of standing army, ready to engage in gun violence against people who have the natural right to be left alone. Thanks for watching, one and all. Please like and subscribe. Follow us on Rumble. Subscribe there and share the videos. Give us a big thumbs up. Yes, we're still on Twitter, and we still occasionally get censored there. You can find us on Facebook as well as on Twitter and on Instagram and on TikTok. And of course, we hope you'll visit MRC-TV.org. That's MRC-TV.org. And while you're there, please consider donating to the Media Research Center and shopping at the MRC store. You can find me on Gab as @GardnerGoldsmith, and on Twitter I'm @GardGoldsmith. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.